Luke chapter 20. And we've got a lot of reading to do. Of course, we always stand in honor and reverence to the reading of God's Word. So you may want to stretch before you do, but let's stand up as we give honor and reverence to the reading of God's holy, inspired, infallible, and inerrant Word. Luke chapter 20, beginning with verse 1. If you haven't done so yet, look at your neighbor and say, "Good morning, neighbor." Everybody get spoken to? All right. Good. Luke chapter 20, verse 1. Now it happened on one of those days, as he taught the people in the temple and preached the gospel, that the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted him and spoke to him, saying, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is he who gave you this authority?" But he answered and said to them, "I also will ask you one thing, and answer me." And this was a common occurrence in the debate at this time. Answer a question with another question. So Jesus says, "The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, so they hit pause, had a little team meeting here. This was a difficult question. As they're reasoning together, they say, if we say from heaven, he will say, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. So Jesus had put them between a rock and a hard place. So they answered that they did not know where it was from. And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." Then he began to tell the people this parable. A certain man planted a vineyard, leased it to the vine dressers, and went into a far country for a long time. Again, a very common practice during this time. Now at vintage time, he sent a servant to the vine dressers that they might give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the vine dressers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again, he sent another servant. They beat him also, treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent a third, and they wounded him also and cast him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Probably they will respect him when they see him." But when the vine dressers saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may be ours." So they cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, "Certainly not." Then he looked at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Whoever falls on that stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder." And the chief priests and the scribes that very hour sought to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them. May God bless the reading of His Word. You may be seated here. We'll put two passages together. Could be taught separately, but I believe they fit. We're going to look at it in this context. Jesus on His authority and the parable of the vineyard. No need for a big introduction here, except to remind you that as we have gone through Luke, in Luke chapter 9, the Bible says Christ set His face toward Jerusalem. What happened from that moment to the cross was all about getting to Jerusalem to lay down His life for our sin and the sins of the world. And now we have watched Him ride in on the donkey, and the people herald Him as king. And He immediately now goes to the temple. You remember He cleansed the temple. He says, "My house shall be called a house of prayer." And now in this last week of His life, He is in the temple. There's where we are contextually in the life and ministry of Christ. Notice first of all here, His proclamation. His proclamation. Back in the first verse it says, "Now it happened on one of those days as He taught the people in the temple," and watch, "and preached the gospel." He's proclaiming the good news. I had never really thought about it, but when you're going through the Gospel of Luke like this, you really get a sense of the timing of this. This is Passion Week. This would be the week that Christ would die for the sin of the world. And He knew it. He had talked about it. He had alluded to it. But that did not stop Him from doing this ministry the Father had sent Him to do. In fact, I heard Alistair Begg teaching on this passage once, and he suggested that this may have been Christ's last day of ministry. After this comes Passover, the Lord's Supper, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, His arrest, and ultimately His crucifixion. So the Bible doesn't tell us exactly, but using the other gospel accounts of this passage, some suggest this was His last day. How many of you are retired from your regular or real job? And I know what retirement means. Some of you with your hands raised, you work constantly, right? You're doing more now. How many of you are retired and you're the school bus for your grandchildren? Anybody? Yep, a lot of hands there. And you're going to their ball games and birthday parties, and then there's yard work, and then if you're on the Building and Grounds Committee, you're here every day, amen, doing something at the church or you're teaching a class. I know what retirement means. But those of you that retired from your job, how many of you remember your last day on the job? Your last day. That was a big day, right? How many of you actually did work at your job on your last day versus let's all go around and eat cake and get our gold watch, right? Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just hang out, reminiscing. We have some teachers here. Last week of school, how much education is actually done there? Last week of school, none. You just try to keep the kids alive that final week so you can send them home. This may or may not have been his last day, but if it wasn't, he's close. He wasn't crucified the next day, but his last day to do ministry, what do we see and find Christ doing? He's doing the same thing he did 3 years prior when he kicked off his ministry in the synagogue. He's preaching the gospel. He's doing on his last day what he was doing on the first day. And you know what? Whenever God retires me from preaching and pastoring, and it'll be fine with me if I just die in the pulpit one day and go on to heaven. You say, wow, that's very honorable. Yes, and I have terrible retirement. So that's fine with me. If I just preach right up until the rapture or Him calling me home. But however He decides to do it in His sovereign wisdom and will, here's what I hope and pray for my ministry. I ask you to pray for me that this would be true. I want to be preaching the same gospel at that day I preached 25 years ago in Pelzer. There's been some ideas and some things that I have changed somewhat on. But one thing has not changed in my ministry in 25 years. This is the Word of God. It is the words for life and living and salvation. And the gospel that saved 25 years ago is still the gospel that saves today. He's called us to preach the good news, and Christ is preaching the gospel. You say, but what was the gospel that day? Paul says the gospel, the good news we share, is Christ suffered and died for our sin, was buried and rose again. And yet in Luke 4, we find Christ preaching the gospel. Now in Luke 20, we see Jesus preaching the gospel, but He hadn't died for our sin yet. He hadn't been resurrected yet. The good news was this: the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All the promises in the Old Testament that God made to His people, they're here. They're now. The Messiah He promised is me, and I'm here. Salvation is near. Repent and believe and receive the kingdom. My first job at a church was a part-time job. Well, I had an interim before this, but my real first job, part-time, minister of music, Burnsview Baptist Church, right outside Greer, South Carolina. Big time. Big time. And wonderful little church that has now actually exploded because of BMW. Neighborhoods and people have moved in, and they've reached these people. Burnsview has really, really grown to the glory of God. But I was the minister of music there, and we had a pastor that was about to retire. And it just so happened that his last day on the job officially was a Wednesday night. And I thought, that's poor planning. I don't want to go out on a Wednesday. You say, why? Because I'm a Baptist. Nobody's here on Wednesday. There's just a handful of people here on Wednesday. I'd want to go out on homecoming Sunday morning so I could say, brother, when I left, we had 500. We were running 500. But anyways, Preacher Paris was his name. He retired last service, a Wednesday night, this small country church. And I love, he was such a humble man, a humble preacher. And I watched him do that last invitation. And lo and behold, as he extended for the final time a gospel call, a little girl, probably 7 or 8 years old, got up from her pew and walked down to the front. And I watched this dear man of God reach in his back pocket just like any other craftsman would be reaching for the tool of his trade, and he pulled out a little New Testament Bible, and he got down on his knee, and on a Wednesday night in a small country church in Greer, South Carolina, he ushered that little girl into the presence and saving message of the gospel. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. And many times when I pray for my faithfulness in ministry, I don't think about how Billy Graham went out. That's the exception to the rule, man. There's not going to be many Billy Grahams. I don't think about Adrian Rogers. I don't think about Dr. Charles Stanley. I'll never have a pulpit or a ministry probably like those men. But I don't care. Lord, keep me faithful and pure. And if I go out on a Wednesday night leading a child to faith in Jesus Christ, that'll be just fine for me. Be just fine for me. Jesus went out on the last day potentially doing what He was doing when he began His ministry. Watch what happens. First of all, the proclamation. Number 2, now there's an investigation. Whenever God begins to move, there's going to be some investigations. People want to know what's going on. What are you doing to draw all these people? How are you seeing so many people saved? Nowadays they would do that, but here's what they did. The Bible says He taught the people in the temple. He preached the gospel. And on this day, the chief priests and the scribes, together with the elders, confronted Him. This is a serious group of people. This is now the religious elite, and they don't like what's happening. They don't like what is going on at all. Most likely, though Luke does not specify, this is probably the Sanhedrin. The Pharisees are gone at this point. He's within the temple. And they spoke to Him saying, tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is He who gave you this authority? Luke says so many times in his gospel that Jesus taught with authority. He healed, therefore He demonstrated His authority. What are these things they're referencing? Well, they're talking about who gave you the authority to ride in here on a donkey like you're somebody. That's supposed to be for kings. Who gave you that authority? And then you got off that donkey, you came in here in this temple, and you ran people out. And you said, this house, my house, shall be called a house of prayer. And now the Bible says you're teaching, and as he was teaching, remember 2 weeks ago I pointed out the Bible says they hung on his every word. Who gave you this authority? Who gave you this right? So Jesus answers their question this way. He says, I'll ask you one thing, answer me this. Verse 4, the baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? It had to be from one of the two. I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. If you'll answer me this, riddle me this, Jesus says, the baptism of John, was that from God or from man? And they said, hold on a second. And they huddled up. You ever watch Family Feud? You ever see them do that? Oh, come on. And they huddle up. Oh, and somebody says, well, let's just say, that John was the false prophet. Because we didn't like what he said. He called us bad names. So, of course, he wasn't God ordained. They say, oh, wait. Now, people love John the Baptist. If we go out there and tell them that he was a false prophet, they'll stone us. Somebody says, that's a good point. I don't really feel like getting stoned today. So we'll just say, yeah, he was a prophet of God. They say, well, wait now, if we say that, if you remember, John said this guy Jesus is the Lamb of God. All these people love John, but John pointed them to this guy, and this John the Baptist said, this man, this Jesus is the one. I'm not worthy to loosen his sandals. And if you remember, John actually baptized this Jesus, and they say when he did, they heard a voice from heaven. So if we say John was not a prophet of God, they're going to kill us. If we say he was a prophet of God, it's going to add validity to the ministry of Christ. We'll answer our own question. What do we do? They said, don't say anything. We'll just get mad and leave. Let's not answer his question. You know what? It's just not worth it. But then, number 3, we see an illustration. All right, so illustration comes after the investigation. The investigation was closed. Jesus painted them into a corner. But then Jesus begins to teach a parable in verse 9. And as we go back and read this parable, with their question still lingering in the air, I think what Jesus does in parable form is he answers their question. Let's read it again together. In verse 9, he began to tell the people this parable. Certain man planted a vineyard and leased it to the vine dressers and went into a far country for a long time. Let's just take this. This is one of the easier parables to discern. The image of a vineyard was commonly used by Old Testament people to refer to the nation of Israel itself. God had planted a vineyard by creating for himself a covenant people. Israel was God's vineyard. So Jesus says, God planted Israel. You, Israel, are God's vineyard. And he went into a far country for a long time. So God establishes the Jews as his covenant people. He's in heaven. He's chosen through Israel to reveal to the rest of the world his goodness and glory. That was God's plan, to take the weakest and the smallest, and by blessing and protecting them, by calling them out and them living a holy life, he would demonstrate to the world what it looked like to worship and serve the one true God. Verse 10, now at vintage time he sent a servant to the vine dressers that they might give some of the fruit of the vineyard, but the vine dressers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant. They beat him. Again he sent a third. They wounded him, cast him out. Here's the picture of Israel's history. For a while, they may do okay, and God would bless. But you know the story. Ultimately and eventually, they'd turn their back on God. They'd worship other gods. Or they would allow sin to come in and pollute their holiness and testimony. So God would send a prophet. Go and straighten my people up. And what would they do to the prophets? They'd beat them. Chase them out. Kill them. That was the history of Israel in the Old Testament. So then in verse 13, the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Probably they will respect him when they see him." What did God do when He saw the mess they had made? He said, "I have to send my son now." John 3:16, "For God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son." Maybe they'll respect Him. Verse 14, "But when the vine dressers saw Him, they reasoned among themselves." I don't think that's an accidental wording there, pointing back to how they responded to the question of Christ, saying, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill Him, that the inheritance may be ours." So they cast Him out of the vineyard and killed Him. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? So I never really thought about it this way, but perhaps in the telling of this parable, Jesus answers their question. He kind of answered their question by bringing up John the Baptist, because John the Baptist identified the authority of Christ. He was the Messiah. He was the anointed one. But Jesus goes on to expound even further. He said, God the Father planted Israel. It's His vineyard. My best friend in ministry, Keith Kelly, started a church about 15 years ago. You know what he named it? His Vineyard. This is His vineyard. This is His church. This is my Father's world. You know why God is God and you're not? He's the creator of all things. This isn't Jamie's church, it's God's church. I didn't start it, I don't sustain it, I don't provide for it. It's God's church. I mentioned a few weeks ago, these 3 boys, they're His boys. They're on loan to me. So I submit to His will and authority. My beautiful wife sitting over here, that's His. He made her, not me. I am to love and to lead and to care and protect, and she is to do the same to me in service and worship to Him. This is His world. Jesus is reminding them, you're not the creator of this holy nation God has established. God owns it all. But He's also saying this, I'm His son. He's identifying Himself as the heir. They said, by what authority are you doing these things? And Jesus' answer is, if you won't believe John the Baptist, hear me now. The creator of it all, I'm His son. And then He foretells of what they will ultimately do. He gives a prophetic and historic picture here in verses 17 and 18. Read this with me. Then He looked at them and said, what then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Whoever falls on that stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it'll grind him to powder. This is a quotation from Psalm 118, a messianic psalm. It references the Messiah Himself. The image is of a stone mason carefully examining the raw materials in order to select the best stone for this beautiful building. They find one piece of stone they consider unworthy, so they throw it in the junk pile. This isn't the stone we want. And Jesus is saying, I am that stone. You, the builders, the one God gave the stewardship of leading His people as priests and as the religious crowd, you've rejected the chief cornerstone. They didn't like how Christ came. They didn't like how He looked. They didn't like His hometown. They certainly didn't like His message. So they rejected Him. But here's what Jesus said. You can reject me all you want, but it does not change the fact of who I am. I am the chief cornerstone. You didn't want me, but God has ordained me as the chief cornerstone. And He says to them, there will be people who stumble over me. And even still, there will be some people who I will fall on and grind to powder. Our eternal destiny depends on this: what we do and believe about Jesus. It's not about a Sunday school attendance pin. It's not about a tax receipt to demonstrate how much money you gave to the church. It's not about all the good deeds you've done. It's about this: who is Jesus to you? And Jesus said, I am the stone which the builders rejected. Which leads me to the fourth point today. We'll close with this. Why is Jesus rejected? Why is Jesus rejected? And I think we see some of this clearly, and then some I'll submit to you from other scriptures. Number one, some reject His authority and rule. I'm sad to say this, but there are some who just blatantly reject God as King and Jesus as Savior. They're blind to the reality. And the Bible says the only way we know Christ and see Him for who He really is for the Holy Spirit of God to open our eyes to that truth. And those to whom God has not opened their eyes, they reject His authority and rule. They don't want a king. They don't want an authority. They don't want to submit to anyone. Personal autonomy is one of the greatest tenets of our modern day culture. I read last week or 2 weeks ago, somebody asked an AI platform, I can't remember which one it was, to write a new 10 commandments. Did anybody else see this? So y'all know what AI is? You can go and ask this computer, this I don't know how it all works. But they asked this computer, write a modern day 10 commandments. The number one commandment number one, do not violate someone else's personal autonomy. In other words, don't you dare tell me how to live my life. And here's a big problem with the Jesus of Scripture. He meddles, don't he? He plows too close to the cotton. There's some people say, I don't want no law that violates my checkbook or my bedroom. Jesus does. He comes right into your house. He comes right into the bedroom. He goes right into your bank account. He touches and tells about everything, and people reject it. They say, I don't want it. And others reject His call because He calls us to deny ourselves and to forsake all for Him. He tells us, if you're going to serve me and follow me, I must be first. And some people say, absolutely not. Every once in a while, Jesus would be teaching and healing, and the crowd of people following Him would grow and swell. And then every so often, Jesus would thin the herd. He'd stop and He'd say, oh, listen, if you really want to follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. And some say, I'm going to the house. Rich young ruler comes in. What must I do to inherit eternal life? I've done this, this, this. He says, okay, that's good. You've done all that. Sell all you've got and give it to the poor and follow me. He said, I'm out. That is a line I will not cross. And some people are determining their eternity based on money or based on some sinful activity they are not ready to forsake. But if you truly see Jesus for who He really is, forsaking all is a small price to pay. Number 3, some people reject His messengers and His methods. So many people today say, I'm not going to follow Jesus because I had a preacher one time when I was 10 years old and he did this or he did that. And sometimes people aren't comfortable with our methods. This idea of me getting up and preaching the Word. Along with personal autonomy, there is a pushback against any established institution. And the church represents an established institution, and we are an anti-institution culture right now. Everything must be torn down, deconstructed, and all those things. So I don't want a preacher, I don't want a church, I don't want a small group, a Sunday school class exhorting me. That's my weekend, I can't give it all up, and they're rejecting Jesus as a result. And unfortunately, there are some. We were watching a documentary the other night about Hillsong, New York. Have y'all seen this? And Hillsong, New York just exploded as a church. And then lo and behold, comes to find out that the pastor was having an affair. And I can't begin to imagine how many people were turned away from God and His church because of the selfish and lustful actions of somebody that was supposed to be different and supposed to be better. And by the way, he's just one. That's just one example. And the devil uses things and situations and people like that to cause people to turn away from God and the gospel, which leads me to the last thing. Some are just deceived. I'm amazed at how many people that used to come to a Baptist church are now going to a Jehovah's Witness hall. Some are deceived by another cult like Mormonism. You say, well, Mormonism's not a cult. Some of those people are really nice. I hate to tell you this, hell's full of nice people. Mormonism is a cult. Jehovah's Witness is a cult. Here's what makes it a cult. It denies the deity of Christ. Morality has nothing to do with it. So if you've got a Mormon neighbor or a neighbor that's been deceived by the Jehovah's Witness church, they may be nice. They may live moral lives, but you must share the true and genuine gospel with them. They're lost. Some are deceived. The devil is a great deceiver. So this leads me to the second part of our application. So what's our answer to that? What is our answer? Well, we look to Christ here. Christ was surrounded by a culture and a religious group that denied His deity and denied the true gospel. What did He do? What are we called to do in 2023 in this world we're living in? Well, first of all, we got to love them. We got to love them. As frustrated as Christ would become at a variety of times, sometimes at His own disciples, He never stopped loving. After 3 years of rejection and hard work on a daily basis, Christ still laid down His life on the cross for these people. He died for those who rejected. We must never stop loving. We can't stop loving these who are deceived by the devil. We can't stop loving people who turn us down time and again. Those neighbors we're witnessing to, these people we see on TV protesting things that violate the Word of God, whether that's homosexuality, adultery, whatever the case may be. We have to keep loving because Christ loved us. And were it not for the grace of God, there go you and I. We can't stop loving. And as a part of that, number 2, we can't stop saying the truth. I get frustrated sometimes watching people in our some religious. It's an either-or situation. We're either all love, and therefore we can't tell people the truth, or we're all truth without any love for our culture. The Bible says we're not to love the world or the things of the world, and yet the Bible says God so loved the world. How does that work? Here's what the Bible means. You don't love sin. You don't lie about what God's Word says. And by the way, I know it's 2023. I'm still going to preach the book. I'm not going to make an apology for God. I'm not ashamed of what He says. And by the way, I violate it all the time. I sin. And you sin. But here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to take one sin and make it the unpardonable sin. Are y'all all right? Yeah, I don't want to have selective outrage. I don't want to get upset at someone because of their sexual orientation and then overlook somebody that's cheating on his wife or somebody else committing the sin of sex outside of marriage. Sexual sin, sexual sin. Amen? I thought I was just going to have to ask Paula to amen on that one. So I appreciate that. That was stronger than what I thought. You know what the Bible also says? Don't gossip. The Bible says don't lie. See, I went to Cancun. Now I'm plowing too close to the cotton. I rested up. So somehow, like Christ, we have to blend love and truth. So what do? We present truth as lovingly as we can. And those that we're speaking truth to, we have to truly and genuinely love them. Love them. And then number 3, we got to serve people. Jesus said, I didn't come to be served, I came to serve. So Jesus never violated truth. He never failed to love. And He never stopped serving. Last Supper, He's washing their feet. So we got to serve people. I love how we love on each other here in this church. We got to love outside the walls of this church as well. And we're doing much better with that. I love it. I love it. It's what He's called us to do. And it's through our serving and our never-ending love that people see God. And then lastly, we still have to declare. Jesus was still preaching the gospel. Some say, well, here's how we win the lost. We just love on them. Well, preacher, isn't that what you just said? Oh, that's part of it. But sooner or later, we got to share the gospel. Mondays, we got a group that share clothes with people for free. But they also share the gospel. I'm not going to lead anybody to salvation just by putting a shirt on their back. We're not going to lead people to Christ just by doing an addiction small group or hosting an after-school program or having an English as a second language class. At some point, the truth must be declared. We can love all we want, man, but ultimately and eventually, we got to tell the truth. And here's the truth. That Jesus died for our sin according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, and 3 days later He rose again. And John 14:6 says He is the way, the only way to be saved. And we have to declare that. Preacher, that's not popular, but it's right and it's true. And that's what will change people's eternal destiny.